A senior Russian lawmaker has accused the United States of meddling in Russia's domestic affairs by publishing a map. The map was posted by the U.S. Embassy in Russia, and it shows the route of an unregistered opposition protest and warned U.S. citizens to avoid that route because of a large police presence.
Well, the Russian government responded by issuing the following statement. It was emphasized that the foreign ministry regarded the publication of the protest route map drawn by the organizers of the illegal event as an act encouraging participation and a call to action, which constitutes an attempt to interfere in Russia's domestic affairs. Now, according to the Russian website, the ministry summoned a senior U.S. diplomat and presented him with an official complaint. Joining us now from Moscow is the Washington Post's Will Englund. Will, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about these protests first. And we've seen some of the video of this. At least 1,500 demonstrators have been detained over the last few weeks. What are the protests focused on?
The protests are focused on trying to get opposition candidates on the ballot for city elections that will be held next month. One candidate after another has been stricken off the ballot by the Central Election Commission, and these demonstrators are trying to make the point that they should be put back on the ballot.
You know, you see this video, and you have to imagine that Russian authorities and key political figures are reacting to these protests. But then again, it's Russia. Sometimes they say nothing. So what do we know?
Well, they're particularly, they've cracked down particularly hard on protests that have happened without permits being issued. You can have a legal protest in Russia, or you can have an impromptu illegal one. And it's the illegal ones that have drawn this very, very strong reaction. It's a much stronger reaction than we've typically seen before in Russia against protesters. There are people here who say that the Russian government has run out of ideas and they don't know how to deal with this kind of unrest anymore. They're unable to co-opt the protests, and so they're just sending in the police in a big way.
The protests don't appear to be dying down at all, whether they're the planned ones or the illegal ones. There's another one that's planned for Saturday. Why is that? And is that Saturday protest, is that one of the planned ones, or is that an illegal one?
They have a permit for Saturday.
Okay.
It's not going to be in the center of Moscow. It'll be just slightly to the northeast of the center, but not remote by any means. A place where, if you remember, there were large protests in Moscow in 2011, 2012, when Vladimir Putin came back to the presidency, and many of them took place in this same spot. The police have warned that if anyone tries to break off and have their own protest somewhere closer to the center, that they will react very, very strongly to that.
You know, in the wake of Russian meddling in the 2016 U.S. elections, what's the significance here of the Russian government accusing the United States of now meddling in its domestic affairs?
Well, of course, the embassy says, this was simply a warning to Americans. Here are the routes that you should stay away from, places you should stay away from. I guess you could take it as a subtle invitation to protesters, although I think most Russians who were inclined to protest already had a pretty good idea of where to go. The Russians have also complained about the German news agency, which did somewhat the same thing. And they're complaining that the Germans are also trying to, promote these protests.
Now, Will, we know that the American government also has an agenda there. So was this truly just a warning for U.S. citizens, or was there something else behind it?
Well, if you talk to the embassy, yes, of course it was a warning. Of course, there is. How can I put this? Within the U.S. government, there is sympathy for the protesters. I suspect that this was intended as a communication to American residents of Moscow.
Mm-hmm. And that's it?
Well.
Officially, yes.
I would say yes. That's probably it.
All right.
Well, let's stop putting Will on the spot here.
Yeah, Will does live in Moscow. We want him back on.
Yeah, so. we want him safe.
All right. Will, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Hundreds of